Namaskar. Today I'm going to be talking about the 14th paragraph of Nāṉ Ār. During our last meeting, I spoke about the previous paragraph, the 13th paragraph, in which the central topic is surrender. One is talking about letting go, and in the first sentence he says that he implies that being so keenly self-attentive that we thereby give no room to rising of any other thoughts is alone surrendering ourselves to God. That alone is giving ourselves to God. And then he assures us that however much burden we place upon God, he will bear all of it. And then that's the second sentence. In the third sentence, he says, since one Parameshwara Shakti, supreme ruling power, one divine power, power of God, is driving all karyas, that's whatever needs or ought to be done or to happen, instead of we also yielding to it, why to be perpetually thinking it's necessary to do like this, it's necessary to do like that? That is, the implication is we need not even be concerned about what we should do or what we shouldn't do. We can leave the entire burden to God. So in the first sentence, he says we need not think anything. In the second sentence, he assured us that however much burden we place on God, he will bear all of it. That implies that even if we can leave the burden of thinking to him, we don't have to think anything because he will take care of everything. And in this sentence, he implies we don't need to do, and we don't need to be concerned about what we should do or what we shouldn't do. Leave it entirely to him. In other words, if we are so keenly self-attentive that we don't give room to the rising of any other thoughts, he will do all the thinking for us, and he will make us do whatever actions we should do. And so we don't have to concern ourselves about thought or about action. In other words, we can leave the entire burden to him. And then in the last sentence, he gives an analogy to illustrate this, to illustrate that we can leave the entire burden to God. What he says in the last sentence is, though we know that the train is going, bearing all the burden, why should we who go traveling in it, instead of remaining happily, leaving our small luggage placed on it, suffer bearing it on our head? Here, this sentence illustrates what he said in the previous sentence, but there are two important words here that illustrate the benefit of surrender. One is, he says, instead of remaining happily, the term he uses for happily is sukhamai. And then he ends by saying, ain kashtapadavendam, why should we suffer carrying that small burden on our head? So if we don't surrender, the benefit we get of not surrendering is that we suffer. If we do surrender, the benefit we get is that we are happy. Here he's indicating what is the true benefit of surrender. If we want to be happy, all we have to do is to surrender completely. We need to let go of everything. So since the topic there was about, since he mentioned there about happiness, very appropriately, in this 14th paragraph, the next paragraph, he takes up the subject of happiness. So this 14th paragraph is all about happiness, which is arguably the central topic throughout this work. That is the central aim of Bhagavan's teaching. What we all want is to be happy. Before going through this 14th paragraph, I'll first go through the first paragraph, because in the first paragraph, Bhagavan introduced this topic of Atma-vichara, talking about happiness, that what we all want is to be happy. So I will just to remind ourselves, I'll just go through this this first paragraph, because this is what Bhagavan's teachings are all about. What it is, the sole aim of Bhagavan's teaching is that we should be happy. And since happiness is our real nature, the only thing that obstructs our happiness is our rising of ego, so annihilation of ego is necessary. That's why Bhagavan's teachings are all focused on the annihilation of ego, with the aim for us to be as we actually are, because only by being as we actually are can we experience the infinite happiness that is our own real nature. So what he says in the first paragraph, incidentally, this first paragraph was not part of the answers that he originally gave to Shiv Prakash Pillai. This was added by him when he wrote it as an essay version. And later it was added to a subsequent question and answer version, which is a sort of mixture of incorporating some of the changes he made in the essay version with the old question and answer version. So this first paragraph was written by him for the essay version, and it is it's a condensation of the first part of his introduction to Viveka-Chudamani, which he had translated many years earlier. So anyway, what he says in this first paragraph is Sakala Jivagalum Dukumembadindri Epodum Sukamai Iraka Virumbadalam. Since all jivas, that means sentient beings, since all sentient beings want or like to be always happy without what is called misery. The terms he uses for happiness and misery here, Sukhamayirika means to be happy. Sukham is happiness, and Dukkhamembadindri, without what is called misery. So we want, this is the goal of spiritual life. It is said, Dukkha Nivritti Sukha Prapti. This is the goal of spirituality. Removal of misery and attainment of happiness. This is the true goal of spirituality. In fact, it's the goal of all human endeavors, but no other human endeavor can yield the happiness, the misery-free happiness that we're all seeking. And when we understand Bhagavan's teaching, the happiness that we are seeking to attain is not something that we need to newly attain, because it's our very nature. So we are to attain that which is always attained, and we are to remove that which is ever non-existent, because misery exists only in the view of ego. If we investigate ego, there's no such thing. But I'm jumping ahead of myself here, but just to put all of this in context, I mentioned that. So what he says in the first clause, since all sentient beings want or like to be always happy without what is called misery. Here he's giving a series of arguments. So this first clause is the first stage of the argument. Second stage of the argument is in the next clause. Yavakum taniditile ye parama priyam irupadalam. Since for everyone, the greatest love is only for oneself. That is, whatever else we may love, we love it because we think it contributes to our happiness, because what we have greater love for than anything else is for ourselves. We love those things that seem to contribute to our happiness, and we dislike those things that seem to be detrimental to our happiness. So our primary concern is about ourselves. And this is not, it is not wrong, because it is, self-love is our very nature. Self-love seems to be wrong only when we limit ourselves, take ourselves to be this finite person, and then we are more concerned about this person than we are about other people. Selfishness and everything arises out of that. But self-love in its pure form, that is when we know what we actually are, we will find that self-love is our own nature. But since what we actually are is the infinite whole, self-love doesn't exclude anything. But so long as we rise as ego, we create the illusion of self and other. I am this, everything else is other. So that is how self-love, when distorted, when limited, when self-love is misdirected as love for the small person, the body that we seem to be, then it becomes a form. But it is actually our real nature. So we all have greatest love only for ourselves, because such is our very nature. So we all want to be happy, and we all have greatest love for ourselves. And then that's two arguments. Third argument he says in the third clause, Priyataku Sukhame Karanamadalam. And since happiness alone is the cause for love, since happiness alone is the cause for love, and since we have greatest love for ourselves, this is here Bhagavan is presenting an argument why we can reasonably conclude that happiness is our real nature. Since we never love anything if it doesn't give us happiness. We love only those things that give us happiness, or at least that we believe will give us happiness, that have the potential to give us happiness. So if we love ourselves, that implies that since we love ourselves above all other things, that implies that we ourselves are happiness. So that's one of the arguments he gives to establish that happiness is our real nature. Then in the next clause, he gives another argument in support of that conclusion, that happiness is our real nature. He says, Manamatra nidrayo dinam anubhavikum tan subhavamana achukade adeya. That means in order to attain that happiness, which is tansvabhamana, which is one's own nature. That happiness is what we actually are. Why is it what we actually are? He's given one reason in the previous three clauses. He gives another reason in the relative clause within this present clause. One's own nature, tansvabhamana, the relative clauses, which one experiences daily in sleep. Nidrayo dinam anubhavikum. So we experience it every day in sleep. Why does that make it our real nature? Because that sleep is manamatra nidrayo, sleep which is devoid of mind. Since there's no mind in sleep, nothing else exists in sleep. All that exists in sleep is ourself. Since we experience happiness in sleep, where we alone exist, that means we ourselves are happiness. So this is another reason why happiness is our own real nature. That is, the fact that we experience happiness in the absence of all other things in sleep is a very strong evidence that happiness is our real nature. And additional evidence is the fact that since happiness alone is the cause for love, and since we have greatest love for ourselves, that is another reason why we can conclude that happiness is our real nature. So as I say, in this clause, he says, in order to attain that happiness, which is one's own nature, which one experiences daily in sleep, which is devoid of mind, that is relative clauses within relative clauses within relative clauses. The conclusion of this sentence is, tanne tan aridal vendum. Oneself, knowing oneself is necessary. That is, since happiness is our real nature, in order to experience that happiness, all we need to do is to know ourselves. How do we know ourselves? So that's the end of that sentence. Then the question that will then arise is, how do we know ourselves? He gives a brief answer in the next sentence, which is, Adaku Nāṉ Ār ennum Jnana-vichārame mukhya sadhanam. For that, Jnana-vichara, called Who Am I, alone is the principal means. Jnana-vichara, jnana in this context means awareness, the pure awareness that we actually are, the fundamental awareness of our own existence, I am. So investigating that jnana that we actually are, and when we're investigating that jnana that we actually are, we're investigating who am I. So he calls it Nāṉ Ār ennum Jnana-vichara. Jnana-vichara called Who Am I. Alone is the principal means. When he says it's a principal means, whatever other means we may adopt in order to experience happiness, sooner or later, all those other means are useful only to the extent that they bring us to this path. Because since we ourselves are love, happiness, infinite happiness, we cannot experience that infinite happiness that we actually are without knowing ourselves. And in order to know ourselves, we need to investigate ourselves. It's so simple. I mean, it's simple and logical. So most of the rest of this text is explaining this final sentence. For that, Nāṇ-Ār called to our mind is the principal means. That is, Bhagavan elaborates on that to a very great extent in the rest of this work. But for our present context, it's the first sentence is our primary interest today. That is the conclusion Bhagavan comes to. Happiness is our real nature. In order to experience happiness, we need to know ourselves. So this is the topic. This is the subject that he takes up in verse in the 14th paragraph that I'm going to be talking about today. So in that paragraph, he implies that happiness is our real nature. Here he's saying so very explicitly. In the first sentence of this 14th paragraph, he begins by saying, Sukham embadu Atma-vin sarupame. That means Sukham embadu, what is called Sukham. Sukham means happiness, satisfaction, joy, ease, comfort, or pleasantness. What is called Sukham, Atma-vin sarupame. It is only the swarupa of Atma. It is only the swarupa means literally swarupa means own form. It implies the real nature of ourselves. So happiness is our very nature. And that's the first sentence. So that is saying what the reason for that is the reason given in the first paragraph. He gives two reasons there in the first paragraph for that. And then in the second sentence of this 14th paragraph, he says, Sukhamum Atma-sarupamum Verandru. Sukham and Sukha, happiness, and Atma-sarupa are not different. So Atma-sarupa means the real nature of ourselves, or our own real nature, what we actually are, and happiness are not different. They are one and the same thing. It's worth remembering here when he mentions Atma-sarupam, it's worth remembering what he said in the 7th paragraph, in which he began by saying, Yathatamai ulladu Atma-sarupam andre. What actually exists is only Atma-sarupa. It's only the real nature of ourselves. So what we actually are, that alone is what actually exists. He implies that here in the 14th paragraph, because after saying that happiness and Atma-sarupa are not different, he then says, Atma-sukham. Atma-sukham means the happiness that is oneself. Andre ulladu, that alone exists. So he's saying much the same as he said in the first sentence of the 7th paragraph, but there he just mentions our real nature. Here he's specifying that our real nature is only happiness, and that happiness that is our real nature, that alone exists. And then to make this, to drive home the point still more forcibly, he says, Aduve satyam, that alone is real. So the happiness that is our own real nature, that alone exists, and that alone is real. What exists and what is real is one and the same. Real means what actually exists, as opposed to what merely seems to exist. So when it is said, for example, this whole world is unreal, what it means is, though it seems to exist, it doesn't actually exist. So whatever actually exists is real. Whatever doesn't actually exist but merely seems to exist is unreal. So, but happiness is what actually exists. It alone is what actually exists, and it alone is real, and it is what we actually are. It is our own Atma-sarupa, our own real nature. So here he said, these first 4 sentences, he's very, very emphatically driving home that happiness is our own real nature, and that alone is what actually exists, and that alone is real. What is Sukham embadu Atma-vin sarupam. What is called Sukham, happiness, alone is the swarupa of ourself, our own real nature. Sukham and Atma-sarupa are not different. Sukhamum Atma-sarupamum Verandram. Atma-sukham andre ulladu. Atma-sukha alone exists. Aduve satyam, that alone is real. So he emphasizes this point very forcefully and unequivocally in the first 4 sentences of this paragraph. Then he goes on to say, in the 5th sentence, Prapanja porul ondrilavadu sukham embadu kidayadu. That means what is called happiness, sukham embadu, kidayadu, is not found or is not obtained or is not available. Prapanja porul ondrilavadu, in even one of the objects of the world. So there's nothing in this world, in no object and in no event, there's nothing in this world in which happiness exists. Happiness is our own real nature. It exists only within ourselves. But it seems to us that we attain happiness from things. If we have desire for a tasty meal and we're feeling very hungry, and someone gives us a tasty meal, we feel very happy. If we living in poverty and experiencing so many financial difficulties, we may have great desire for money. And when we get money, because our desire for it is satisfied, at least temporarily, we'll be very happy. But now all my financial difficulties are over. I can clear all my debts, pay all my bills, and I have money left over in the bank. So we feel very happy for a while. But of course, such happiness is very fleeting. But why is it that we seem to attain happiness from these material things, from a tasty meal, from having a nice bank account, sufficient money in our bank, or from having nice friends, or from achieving name and fame or appreciation in society, or whatever we may desire, or to be very learned. We desire so many things, and the things we desire seem to give us happiness. That's why we desire them. If they didn't seem to give us happiness, we wouldn't desire them. But what does Bhagavan have to say about that? In the 6th sentence, he says, so after saying what is called happiness is not found in even one of the objects of the world, he then goes on to say, Aveka galilirandu, from them, that means from the objects of the world, sukham kide padaha, namadu avivekatal ninikarom. We think that happiness is attained from them because of our aviveka. That is, because of our aviveka. Aviveka means our lack of judgment or discrimination, or our ability to distinguish one thing from another. Because we lack that viveka, that clear, that mental clarity to discern where the happiness is really coming from, we think we're getting happiness from external things. So because of our avivekata, we think sukham kidepadaha means as if happiness is attained from them. We think, I translate it as, we think that happiness is attained from them, but it's perhaps be closer to meaning to say, we think as if happiness will be attained from them because of our aviveka. So it's that lack of discrimination. If we had greater power of discrimination, greater clarity, we would be able to recognize that the happiness that we seem to experience from other things, we seem to be obtaining from other things, actually it comes only from within ourselves, as he goes on to explain. Then in the next sentence, he says, Manam veliyil varam podu, dukate anubhavikiradu. That means when the mind comes out, it experiences dukkha. Dukkha is the opposite of sukha. Sukha, as I said, means happiness or satisfaction, or joy or ease or comfort or pleasantness. That is sukha. Dukkha is the opposite of that. Dukkha is dissatisfaction, discomfort, uneasiness, unpleasantness, unhappiness, distress, suffering, sorrow, sadness, pain, or affliction. It's the terms sukha and dukkha each of them have a broader range of meanings than any one term in English. That's why I've tended to stick to the same terms here. For example, in Buddhism, it is said that the very nature of human existence is dukkha. And it's not only in Buddhism, that's in there and everywhere, but that's a very central teaching of Buddha, that embodied existence, samsara, is dukkha. People may say, oh, no, I'm quite happy. I've got a very nice, comfortable life. I've got a good job. I've got sufficient income coming in. I've got my own house. I've got a nice husband or wife. I've got well-behaved children. Everything's going well in my life. My parents are still in good health, and everything is going hunky-dory in my life. So my life, I'm free of all misery. I'm very happy. That we are fooling ourselves if we think that. We are, even in the best of times, when things seem to be most favorable for us, there's still an underlying dissatisfaction, because we all know, even if we've got everything we could want today, these things aren't going to last. We may have money in the bank today. Tomorrow there could be a stock market crash and all our money could be gone. We could get ourselves into heavy debt and not be able to finish paying our mortgage, and the house can be repossessed, or so many things. So for material possessions, they are unreliable if they're fleeting. However much wealth we amass, we can lose it all. And if we don't lose it before death, we certainly lose it when we die. Likewise with health. We may seem to be healthy now, but at any time, disease can come or an accident can come. And our very healthy, even the healthiest body in an accident, it can be it can be rendered infirm. So whatever we are, if we depend on these material things for our happiness, there will always be an underlying dissatisfaction. Okay, I've got $1,000 in my bank. But if I had 10,000, then it would be better. I'd be more secure. And when we get 10,000, we want 100,000. When we got 100,000, we want 1 million. When we've got 1 million, we want 100 million. When we've got 100 million, we want 1 billion. When we've got 1 billion, we want 100 billion. Because there's no end to it. Even nowadays in the world, there are centi-billionaires, people with hundreds of billions of dollars, but they're still not happy. They're still seeking more and more, because we can never be satisfied, because our real nature is infinite happiness. We cannot be satisfied with anything less than infinite happiness. And we cannot experience that infinite happiness that we actually are without knowing ourselves. And we cannot know ourselves without giving up everything that is not ourselves. So we need to renounce everything. We need to give up this. We need to surrender ego completely in order to experience the infinite happiness that we actually are. Until then, we are inevitably experiencing dukkha in some form or other. There will always be a dissatisfaction. Every action we do, whether by mind, speech, or body, in other words, every thought we think, every word we say, every physical action we do, they're all driven by our desire for happiness. And we have that desire for happiness because of the underlying dukkha, because of the underlying dissatisfaction. We are never satisfied, so we're always seeking something more. So as Bhagavan says, when the mind comes out, when he says when the mind comes out, what does the mind come out from? Here I put in square brackets from Atma-swarupa. That's not in this sentence, but in an earlier sentence, in the fourth paragraph of Nāṉ Ār, there's a sentence in which Bhagavan says, he uses the same word, that is, here he says, manam veliyil varam podu. In that sentence of the fourth paragraph, he says, manam atma-swarupa ninindru velipadam podu. When the mind comes out from atma-swarupa, jagam tandram, the world appears. So the implication, when he talks about the mind coming out, he means the mind coming out from Atma-swarupa. But are we to take that literally true? Does the mind actually come out from Atma-swarupa? No, it cannot, because Atma-swarupa alone exists. Therefore, it's the infinite whole. So there's no such thing as outside Atma-swarupa. So when Bhagavan says when the mind comes out from Atma-swarupa, this is a metaphorical way of saying it. When we rise as ego, and when we rise as ego, our attention turns away from ourselves towards other things. So the mind coming out implies when our attention goes outwards, away from ourselves towards other things. So in this fourth paragraph, he says, when the mind comes out from Atma-swarupa, the world appears. In this 14th paragraph, he says, when the mind comes out, it experiences dukkha. From this, we can draw a simple inference. Since the world appears when the mind comes out, and since the mind experiences dukkha when the world comes out, therefore the world is dukkha. He says precisely this. I will just jump ahead a bit towards the end of this paragraph, because he comes to that conclusion at the end of the paragraph. He says in the last 3 sentences of this paragraph, which I'll go through in more detail afterwards, but I'll just briefly refer to them now because it's closely connected with what we're talking about here. He says, Jagam embadu nineve. So when he says in the 4th paragraph, when the mind comes out, the world appears. When we allow our attention to come out, what appears in this world is nothing but thoughts, as he says in another sentence in that 4th paragraph. So what is called the world is only thought. So that all the seemingly physical objects of this world, all the events of this world, it's nothing but our own mental fabrication. Just like everything we see in a dream, it's our own mind we are seeing as that the dream. It's everything we see in the dream is nothing but our own thoughts, but it seems to be an external world, a material world with events happening and things that we think will give us happiness and things that we think will give us misery. It all seems perfectly real so long as we're dreaming, but it's actually all just a mental fabrication. So the world is nothing but thought. The world is only thought. And then he says in the next sentence, Jagam marayam podu, when the world disappears, adavdu ninevatra podu, when thought ceases. That is when thought ceases. When the world disappears, that is when thought ceases. Manam anandate anubhavikindridu, the mind experiences happiness. So in the absence of thought, and consequently in the absence of the world, the mind experiences happiness. And then in the final sentence, he says, Jagam tondrum podu adu dukate anubhavikindridu. When the world appears, it experiences dukkha. So, as I said, in the 4th paragraph, he says, when the mind comes out from Atma-swarupa, the world appears. In this paragraph, he says when the mind comes out, it experiences dukkha. So the world equals dukkha. He confirms that in this final sentence by saying, when the world appears, it experiences dukkha. It means the mind. So Bhagavan is very, in all these sentences, we can very clearly understand Bhagavan is equating the appearance of the world with misery. Why? Because when we are aware of the world, when the world appears, our attention is turned away from ourselves. Where does happiness lie? It lies only within ourselves. If we're turning our back on happiness, of course we're going to experience misery. It's as simple as that. So if we want to be happy, we need to give up our attachment to this world and to everything that appears in this world. We need to turn our attention within. This is the point that Bhagavan is repeatedly emphasizing throughout all his main works. The solution to all our problems is turning within. So long as we turn outwards, so long as we look outwards, when the mind comes out, it experiences dukkha. So this is a very, very fundamental principle of Bhagavan's teaching. The very nature of looking outwards, looking away from ourselves, looking at the world, attending to things other than ourselves, the very nature of that is dukkha. We will always be dissatisfied so long as we're looking outwards, because the happiness that we are seeking is only within. We ourselves are infinite happiness, infinite satisfaction. But if when we're looking at the world, we're looking away from ourselves at something else. So we naturally experience dukkha, where there will always be dissatisfaction. Then, as I said in the previous sentence, he had said, we think that we attain happiness from them. From them means from objects of the world, because of our aviveka. So then he goes on to clarify how does it seem to us that we're experiencing happiness from external objects. So in the next sentence he says, "Unmayil," in truth, namadu enangal purti ahum podellam, whenever our thoughts are fulfilled. Thoughts here means, it implies our wishes, our hopes, our desires, and so on. So whenever our thoughts are fulfilled, adu, that is the mind, adu means it, meaning the mind in this context, adu, tanudea yatana stana tiku tirambi, it, the mind, turning back to its yatata stana means its proper place, its own proper place. Where is the proper place for the mind to be? In the heart. That is in our real nature. Instead of coming out and experiencing happiness, we should be remaining within. We should be remaining in the heart, in our own real nature. Then only we will experience happiness. So, sorry, I'm explaining it. But what he says here is, "Unmayil namadu enangal purtiyahum podu adu tanodea yatata stanatiku tirambi atma sukate ye anubhavikinjadu." In truth, whenever our thoughts are fulfilled, the mind, turning back to its proper place, experiences only Atma-sukham. That is, when we have a desire for something, suppose we have a desire for a tasty meal, or for a large sum of money in our bank account, or for paying our bills, or clearing our mortgage, or for having being free of marital problems, or being free of problems at office, being free of this or that, or whatever we desire. When our desire for that is fulfilled, when we get what we wanted, the mind turning back to its proper place. That is, when a desire is satisfied, the desire causes agitation in the mind. When the desire is satisfied, the mind at least partially subsides. It turns back and subsides into its heart, into the heart. Maybe not completely, but at least partially. And to the extent to which we turn within and thereby subside back within, to that extent do we experience happiness. And what is that happiness? It's nothing but ourself. That's why he says Atma-sukham. So the implication of this sentence is, in truth, whenever our thoughts, wishes, or hopes are fulfilled, the mind, turning back to its proper place, the heart, our real nature, which is the source from which it rose, experiences only Atma-sukha, happiness that is itself. What we actually are is happiness. So it's only when we turn back within that we experience that happiness. So when our thoughts are fulfilled, are satisfied, temporarily, the agitation that those thoughts caused to our mind subsides, our attention turns back within, and we experience the happiness. But very soon we come out again with dissatisfaction, wanting more happiness from something else. Instead of going deeper within to find the source of happiness, because of our aviveka, we keep on thinking, oh, because I got this money, or because I won the lottery, or because I got a promotion in my work, or because I passed my degree, or because I was the doctors told me I was now free of cancer, or whatever it may be, whatever we are hoping for or wishing for, when that is fulfilled, temporarily the surface agitation of the mind subsides, the mind turns back to its proper place, and thereby experiences Atma-sukham. So this is why we seem to get happiness from other things. The happiness we get from other things is not actually coming from those other things. Bhagavan often used to tell a story to illustrate this. In fact, it's not only Bhagavan, this is it's an ancient story. It's an ancient way of illustrating this. That is, there was a very poor, mangy dog, very, very hungry dog. One day went to a cremation ground, and it was desperately hungry, so it wanted to find something to eat. It thought it in the cremation ground it may find a bone. And eventually it found one dried old bone. And it thought, now this looks a very nice bone. It started chewing on the bone. Because it was a very old bone, it was very brittle, and it started splintering. And the splinters from the bone cut the inside of the dog's mouth. So when the dog dropped the bone and saw the blood on it, the dog thought the blood is coming from inside the bone. So it happily licked the blood and went on chewing the bone. And the more it chewed it, the more its own blood was deposited on the bone, and the more it was thinking it was getting happiness from the bone. Whereas it was getting that blood from the bone, but the blood it was getting was only its own blood. Likewise, all the happiness that we think we achieve from external objects is actually coming only from within us. So we are as foolish as that dog who goes on chewing the bone. The more the dog chews the bone, the more wounds it gets in its mouth. It's not actually getting anything that is not its already. It's its own blood that it is licking and finding very tasty. It does, so it's not actually nourishing itself. Its own blood it's draining in order to nourish itself. You can't live like that. Likewise, we are seeking happiness outside. We will always be dissatisfied because we are not achieving what we actually want. What the happiness we want, we are achieving in iotas, and even that happiness is not coming from the external things. It's coming only from within us. So as I say, the meaning of this sentence is, in truth, whenever our thoughts are fulfilled, the mind turning back to its proper place experiences only Atma-sukha. Then in the next sentence, he says, apadiye, likewise, or in exactly the same way, tukum samadhi muche kalangaleno. At times of sleep, samadhi, and fainting, ichita porul kira podam. And when anything liked is obtained, veritu poruluku kaidundahum podam. When destruction or damage happens to anything disliked. In other words, when a disliked thing is removed, is the implication. Manam antamukamahi, the mind becoming inward facing, Atma-sukate ye anubhavi kiradu. The mind becoming antamukam, becoming inward facing, experiences only Atma-sukha. So whatever happiness we think comes from anything, it's coming only from ourselves. Atma-sukham alone is real. So whatever sukham we seem to obtain from other things is actually our own real nature. It's only Atma-sukham. So the examples he gives are at times of sleep, samadhi, and fainting. What is common to all these three conditions, sleep, samadhi, and muche, that is fainting? They're all states of manolaya. That is, the samadhi he's referring to here is the yogic nirvikalpa samadhi, which he said is just a state of manolaya. In a state of manolaya, manolaya means a temporary dissolution of mind. So when the mind is temporarily dissolved, we experience happiness, as we do every day in sleep. So in sleep, samadhi, and fainting, we experience happiness. What is that happiness? It's only our own, the happiness which is our own nature. It's only Atma-sukham. And so in times of manolaya, we experience happiness. And when else do we experience happiness? Ichita porul kire kirapodam. When the things we like are obtain, when we get it, or when they're available, when we get what we want, then also the mind turns back within and experiences Atma-vichara. Or verita porul galaku kaidundahum, when destruction or damage happens to what is disliked. In other words, when something that is disliked is removed from our experience, we experience happiness. If we've got supposing we've got a cancer diagnosis and we're undergoing chemotherapy, eventually when the surgeon tells us, now you're free of cancer, we're so relieved, we feel so happy. Or if we're in intense pain, suppose we've just broken a leg or something, we're taken to A&E, to the emergency room, and to alleviate our pain while they reset the bone, the doctors may give us a local anesthesia. As soon as we feel when we're relieved of the pain, we feel so we feel such relief, and that relief seems to give us happiness. But that happiness is only what is already existing within us. Or another analogy Bhagavan often used to give is a headache. If you've got a headache, when you're free of the headache, you feel so much relief. Why? Because the headache is not natural. Whatever is not natural, when it's removed, we feel relief. So what is the most unnatural thing of all is the mind. So when in the state of Manolaya, when the mind is dissolved, albeit only temporarily, we experience a happiness that is our own real nature. So in all these circumstances, the happiness we experience in all these different means, whether from sleep or from samadhi or from swoon or from obtaining the things we like or from freeing ourselves from the things that we dislike, the happiness we experience is only our own nature, and we experience that happiness. Why? Because the mind turns back within. So only Bhagavan is very clearly indicating here the only way we can experience happiness is by turning the mind within. The mind turns within naturally at times of sleep, samadhi, and fainting, it dissolves completely back into its source. But even in waking and dream, when we get the things we like or are relieved of the things we dislike, the mind, at least to some extent, turns within and experiences Atma-vichara. It turns within because of the subsidence of the agitation caused by the desire either to attain the thing that is liked or to be free of the thing that is disliked. And then he goes on to say, he goes on to explain in the next few sentences, he explains this in a very graphic way. Ipadi, in this way, manam atmave vittu veliye povadum, ulle tirumbavadum, oi vindri alekiradu. That means, in this way, the mind wanders about incessantly, going outside, leaving oneself, and again turning back inside. So throughout our waking and dream state, the mind is incessantly going outward, seeking happiness. And when it obtains the things it likes, or when it is free of the things it dislikes, it again turns back within and experiences the happiness that is its own self. Just like the dog, the blood on the bone that the dog thought was so delicious is nothing but its own blood. The happiness that we think we get from obtaining the things we like and from being freed of the things we dislike is only the happiness that is within us. So we are incessantly going outside, seeking happiness, and then again turning back inside and actually experiencing happiness. When we go outside, we experience only misery. Only when we turn back within, we experience happiness. And then he gives, to illustrate this, he gives an analogy. Maratadiyil nihil sukamai irkiradu. At the foot of the tree, the shade is pleasant, comfortable, or delightful. It is sukamai, means it is very pleasant, or it gives happiness. Here, Bhagavan obviously is writing this in South India, where even in the winter time, during the midday, the sun will be very, very hot. And in the summer, even more so. So the nature of the sun in tropical climate, it becomes extremely hot in the daytime. So being outside in the sun, it's uncomfortable. So by contrast, under a tree, the shade is very, very pleasant. So he says, Maratadil, Nihru, Sukumai Irikiridu. At the foot of the tree, the shade is pleasant. Veliyil, outside, Surya Bekam, the heat of the sun, Kodumeyai Irikiridu. The heat of the sun is severe or harsh. And then so inside, the shade is very pleasant, the heat of the sun is very harsh. And then he says, Veliyil alayam oruvan, nihilil sendru, kulichi adaikiran. A person who is wandering outside is cooled by going into the shade. Nihilil sendru means by entering in or by going into the shade. Kulichi adekera literally means obtains coolness or attains cooling, but it implies it's cool. So a person who is wandering outside, it means outside in the hot sun, is cooled by going into the shade. Siridu neratu kupin. After a short while, Veli Kalambi, emerging outside, Vepatin Kodume, Atradu, after a short while, emerging outside, being unable to withstand or bear the severity of the heat, Marapadium, Maratadiku, Varukiran. He again comes to the foot of the tree. So this foolish person who's wandering around in the hot sun comes to the shade and enjoys the coolness there. But he doesn't stay there for long. He again, after a short while, he again emerges outside and wanders about in the sun, and then being unable to bear with the severity of the heat, he again comes back to the foot of the tree. And Bhagavan then says, in the next sentence, Ivaru nihilindru veliyil povadum, veliyil inindru nihil salvadumai irikaran. In this way he remains, going from the shade into the sunshine and going back from the sunshine into the shade. Ipidi say keravan avivaki. A person who does that thus is an avivaki. Avivaki means a person who lacks viveka. Viveka means discrimination, judgment, the ability to distinguish one thing from another. So, in other words, an unwise person, a person who lacks wisdom, who lacks a proper judgment, will be constantly going out in the sun, suffering, and then again coming back to the shade, but won't stay long in the shade. He again goes out. So such a person is an avivaki. And then he says, Anal vivakio nihile vitu ningan. But a vivaki, that's a person who has good judgment, discrimination, or is able to who is wise, a wise person, we can say, about vivaki, will not depart leaving the shade. That is, if we understand, if we clearly understand and truly understand with strong conviction that happiness doesn't lie outside in the world, happiness lies only in our heart, we won't go out. The fact that we continue to come out looking for happiness outside Why do we come out? Because we're looking for happiness only. If we didn't think happiness lay outside, we wouldn't be coming out. We'd be staying within. But the fact that we keep on coming outside looking for happiness shows our lack of viveka, our lack of proper judgment, our proper discrimination. Happiness doesn't lie in any of the external things. It only seems to lie in the external things because of our viveka. Because of our lack of viveka. If we have clear viveka, we will understand happiness lies only within. If we've truly understood that, we will not come out. So long as we are allowing our attention to move away from ourselves, we have to understand we are what Bhagavan refers to as an aviveki. We are lacking that wisdom. We are like the person who is wandering, who stays a short while under a tree, shade of a tree, but becomes restless and again goes out into the sun and again suffers in the sun and again comes back to a shade of a tree. So after saying, but the viveki will not leave the shade, will not depart leaving the shade, he says, apadiye, that means likewise, in exactly the same way, jnaniyin manamum, brahmate vittu, ninguva delay. Likewise, the mind of the jnani will not depart leaving Brahman. Here, Bhagavan talks about the mind of the jnani. What's he mean by this? Bhagavan said for jnani, what is jnana? Jnana is nothing but manonasa, the destruction of the mind. So why is he here talking about the mind of the jnani? Obviously, he's talking metaphorically. The jnani doesn't literally have a mind. When he says the mind of the jnani doesn't come outwards, the jnani, as Bhagavan often said, jnana me jnani. The jnana alone is the jnani. So, and the mind of the jnani is nothing but that jnana. But what he implies here is that the attention of the jnani never goes out. It never leaves Brahman. What is Brahman? Brahman is Atma-swarupa, our own real nature. So the mind of the jnani, the attention of the jnani never goes outward. It always remains in its source. It's a metaphorical way of saying it, but the mind of a jnani never goes out leaving Brahman. It means he always remains in Brahman as Brahman. There's no separate mind to come out from Brahman. And then in the next sentence he says, Anal ajnaniyin manamo prapanja til orandru dukkha padubadum siridu neram brahmatiku tirambi sukham adevadum mai irakiradu. That means that the mind of the ajnani remains experiencing dukkha, roaming about the world, and for a short while obtaining sukha, returning to Brahman. So Brahman here means our own real nature. Brahman is nothing other than I. I am Brahman. So when we allow our attention to move away from ourselves, we are going out, leaving Brahman. And when we turn our attention back within, we are returning to Brahman. So by allowing our attention to go out towards the world, we are experiencing dukkha. We are leaving Brahman and thereby experiencing dukkha, and thereby roaming about in the world, as he says. But for a short while, when we obtain this or obtain that, when we get the things we like, or when we are freed of the things we dislike, for a short while we turn back within, we experience a little bit of sukha, which is the nature of Brahman, our own real nature. But again, we go outwards. So this is the analogy Bhagavan gives here of this wandering in and out of the shade is a very nice analogy. If we're wise, we'll just stay in the shade of a tree and be happy. But if we're unwise, we'll be constantly going out into the shade, seeking little pleasures here and there. Then unable to bear the heat of the sun, we again come back. So that's a very beautiful analogy. And it contrasts the state of a jnani who always remains in the shade. The jnani never allows his attention to move away from himself, or even say himself or herself the jnani is beyond all gender, because gender is only for the body. So we can refer to a jnani as it. The jnani never allows its attention to move away from itself towards anything else, because its attention is always immersed in itself. It remains as itself. So the jnani is nothing but Brahman itself. Then we come to the last three sentences, which I briefly touched upon earlier, but I will now talk about in more detail. So he up till now, he's been talking about when the mind comes out, in other words, when the mind faces outwards, faces the world, when we attend to anything other than ourselves, we experience misery. When we turn back within, we experience happiness. So, what is this world? He then takes up that topic, and he doesn't ask the question, but he gives an answer to the question. Jagam embadu neneve. What is called the world is only thoughts. Why is the world only thought? Because the world is nothing, as he says in the sixth paragraph of Nāṉ Ār, the world is nothing but the five kinds of sense impression, there Andrew, not anything else. It's nothing but the five kinds of sense impression. That is what we call the world. It's nothing but sights, sounds, smells, tastes, and tactile sensations. If we remove all of these, there's no such thing as world. The world as we know it is just these five kinds of sense impressions. Just as the world in dream is. In dream, we see things, we hear things, we taste things, we smell things, we feel things by touch. So this world is no different to the world we experience in a dream. Just as the world we experience in a dream is nothing but our own thoughts. It's our own mental fabrication. This world is our own mental fabrication. It has no existence apart from our thoughts, because our perceptions are just another type of thought. When Bhagavan talks about thought, he uses the term thought in a very broad sense. All mental phenomena are thoughts. And since all phenomena are mental, according to Bhagavan, all phenomena are thoughts. So they're all only mental. They have no existence. The world doesn't exist apart from our perception of it. So it is nothing but our own mental fabrication. So just like any world we experience in a dream, what we experience as the world in this waking state is nothing but a series of perceptions, which are just thoughts or mental phenomena. That's what I have put in brackets there to explain this. So, Jagam embadu neneve. This is firm conclusion of Bhagavan. What is called the world is only thought. He expressed the same idea in the fourth paragraph of Nāṉ Ār, where he said, Nenevu gale tavitu, excluding thoughts, jagam endro porul anyamai ilay. There's not separately any such thing as the world. So the world is nothing but thoughts. And then he goes on to say, tukatil Nenevu gale jagamomilay. In sleep there are no thoughts, and there is also no world, implying that because there are no thoughts in sleep, consequently there's no world, because the world is nothing but thoughts. Jagra swapnam galil, in waking and dream, nerevugul ulla, jagamum ulla. In waking and dream, there are thoughts, and consequently there is also a world. The word consequently is not there, but it's implied. So in sleep there are no thoughts, and there is also no world. In waking and dream there are thoughts, and there is also world. So what's the implication? The world is nothing but thoughts. That's why he says here, Jagam embadu nene, the world is nothing but thoughts. So what the world is only thoughts. Neneve, implies only here. A is the A on the end of that he appends to Ninevu, it's a suffix that implies, it's an intensifying suffix. It's often used in the sense of only or actually. So we can take Jagamembadu Nineveh means the world is only thought or the world is actually thought. We can take it either way. But it's putting that emphasis. It implies the world is nothing but thought. Then in the next sentence he says, Jagam Marayam Podu, when the world disappears, Adavadu Ninevatru Podu, that is when thoughts cease. So when the world disappears, when does the world disappear? Only when thoughts cease. So long as the world is there, thoughts are there, because the world is nothing but thought. Only when the world disappears, it disappears because thoughts cease. And when that is the case, manam anandate anubhavikindradu, the mind experiences happiness. So to the extent that thoughts cease and that we thereby cease to perceive the world, we experience happiness. In other words, so long as we're looking outwards, the world seems to be there, thoughts are there, because that is when we're looking outwards, we are projecting the world. The world's nothing but a mental projection. So when we're looking outwards and allowing our attention to go away from ourselves towards the world, we experience misery. But when the world disappears, that means when we turn our attention back within, we experience happiness. And then he says in the final sentence, Jagam Tondram Podu, when the world appears, Adu Dukkate Anubhavikindradu. It experiences dukkha. It means here the mind. So if we want to be happy, if we want to be free of misery, we have to stop looking at the world. So when the world disappears, the mind when the world appears, the mind experiences dukkha. When the world disappears, it experiences ananda or sukham. So this is the nature. So here Bhagavan is very, very clearly implying if we want to experience happiness, we need to stop allowing our attention to move away from ourselves towards other things. We need to stop wandering out in the heat of the sun, in other words. We need to turn our attention back within to face ourselves alone. Only when to the extent to which we attend to ourselves, to that extent is our attention withdrawn from the world. And to the extent that our attention is drawn from the world disappears and we experience happiness. But to the extent we allow our attention outwards to attend to anything other than ourselves, everything other than ourselves is a part of the world, we consequently experience misery. So Bhagavan very, very clearly, that is very emphatically teaches us here that if we want to experience true happiness, we have to turn our attention within. So long as we allow our attention to go outwards, we will inevitably experience dissatisfaction and suffering and so on. Even if our life is relatively pleasant, there'll always be that underlying dissatisfaction. We are never wholly satisfied so long as we allow our attention away from ourselves. So throughout waking dream states, we are experiencing dukkha to a greater or lesser extent. But when the mind subsides in sleep, we experience sukha, only sukha, without any dukkha. So from that, we have to conclude happiness is our own real nature. So are we to sleep permanently? No, that is not a solution because we know the nature. Sleep is only a state of manolaya. It's a temporary dissolution of mind. So long as the mind subsides in manolaya, sooner or later it will rise again. As Bhagavan says in the 13th verse of Upadesh Undya, Ilayamum nasum irendum am odicum. Odicum means in this context means dissolution. So dissolution is two, laya and nasa. That implies dissolution is of two kinds, laya and nasa. Ilayatu ulladu erum, what is lying down, layer to the key, but it implies what is dissolved in layer will rise. Eradu uru mindel. If its form dies, it will not rise. So the difference between layer and nasa, when the mind dissolves in layer, it will certainly rise again. When it dissolves in nasa, it will never rise again. So our aim is mano nasa, not just mano layer, because however long we stay in mano layer, sooner or later we're going to come out of it. Bhagavan told the story of the yogi on the banks of the Ganga who remained in Nirvikalpa Samadhi for 300 years. But when he woke up again, the last thought that was in his mind before he went into Nirvikalpa Samadhi was the first thought that popped up when he woke up. That is, before going into Nirvikalpa Samadhi, he'd asked for water. When he woke up, he angrily asked, "Where's my water?" So even the most superficial thought was not eradicated, in spite of remaining 300 years in Nirvikalpa Samadhi. That means in Manolaya, or Nirvikalpa Samadhi, of these yogis called the Manolaya they bring about by their yogic practices, we don't obtain any spiritual benefit. It's only in the waking and dream state that we can make the effort to turn within, to face ourselves alone, and thereby weaken and eventually eradicate all the vasanas. Of course, we cannot eradicate all the vasanas without eradicating their root. So to the extent to which we practice this path of self-attentiveness, to that extent we are weakening the Vishaya vasanas. The Vishaya vasanas means the inclination to go outwards, to wander out into the hot sun. We are weakening the Vishaya vasanas. And when our Vishaya vasanas are sufficiently weak, we will eventually be willing to turn the 180 degrees within that is required in order for us to dissolve forever back into our source. The reason why the mind rises out of layer is that we go into layer. There are various ways of going into layer. Normally, that is the layer we are all most familiar with is sleep. When we are too tired, we fall asleep. What happens when we fall asleep? Our attention is withdrawn from all other things, and therefore we fall asleep. But though our attention is withdrawn from other things, it is not focused on ourselves. So the ego mind is not destroyed. Likewise, if you are to have a major surgery or be given general anesthesia, those drugs will bring about the manolaya. Certain recreational drugs that people take may give them a nice high and eventually they fall asleep. So that is brought about by those recreational drugs. It can also be, manolaya can be brought about by an accident, a head injury, for example. If you're in a car crash and you have a head injury, you may be in coma some people remain in coma for many years. So that's all the state of manolaya. Likewise, the yogis, by their pranayama and other such practices, they gain the skill to withdraw their attention from all other things, and therefore they remain in a state they call nirvikalpa samadhi, which Bhagavan said is just a state of manolaya. Because though they withdraw their attention from all other things, they don't fix their attention on themselves, so the mind is not destroyed. That's why Bhagavan said in verse 14 of Upadesha, what will this yogi do? That he doesn't say it in so many words here, but the implication is before going into nirvikalpa samadhi, or before entering laya, what he says in that verse is Oduka valiye odungum ulate. The mind which will dissolve or become calm when one restrains the breath, but we don't want it to dissolve completely. So when you attain a certain degree of calmness by pranayama, this is the advice Bhagavan gives to yogis. It's not necessarily, he's not asking us to practice yoga, to practice pranayama or anything, but for those who are following the path of yoga, who are trying to control the mind, subdue the mental activity, it's okay to subdue the mental activity to a certain extent by restraining the breath. But then when the mind is calm, what he says is, uh, uh, that mind which becomes calm by restraining the breath. When the breath is restrained, the mind thereby becomes calm. Vidakave ovari undipara vium adun uru undipara. That means vidakave ovari, when it is sent on the one path, or the path of knowing. Ovari has two meanings. Or in Tamil, oru means one. It's one as an adjective. But before vowels, oru becomes or. But sometimes in poetry you can use or, but even before a consonant. So ovari can be interpreted as one path, but a deeper meaning. Or is a verb that means to investigate or know. So ovari means oramvari, the path of investigation, the investigating path. In other words, the path of self-investigation. So if we want to bring about the dissolution of mind, permanent dissolution of mind, the nasa, we need to send the mind on this path of self-investigation, and then only will its form perish. That's why he says vidakave. Only when the mind is sent on that ovari will its form perish. So, though we can experience happiness in by achieving manolaya, either through achieving manolaya due to tiredness, or due to yogic practices, or due to anesthesia, or whatever, it's only a temporary state. It's of no spiritual benefit. It's only in the waking and dream state that we can weaken and eventually eradicate the vasanas. And for that, the most effective means, mukhya sadhanam, as he says in the first paragraph, is this investigation, who am I? So deliberately turning, not just withdrawing our attention from other things, deliberately turning our attention back towards ourselves. As he says in the 16th paragraph of, 16th verse of Upadesha Undiyar, he begins by saying, Veli videngale vittu, leaving external objects. This is what the yogis are doing by means of pranayama and various techniques they use. They're able to withdraw their mind from all objects, all phenomena. But we achieve exactly the same every day when we fall asleep. We withdraw our mind from all objects and we thereby subside in laya. But if we don't want to subside in laya, if we want to bring about the destruction of the mind, what is required? Veli videngale vittu, leaving external phenomena. And here this is just an adverbial clause. It's not the main clause. The main clause is manam tanoli uru ordale unme unichiyam. The mind knowing its own form of light alone is real awareness. The verb he uses here for knowing is ordale. That's the same verb that he used in verse 14, when in orvari is the same verb, which means to know or to investigate. So when he says manam tanoli uru ordale, he means the mind knowing its own form of light. But because or also mean, the verb or also means investigate, so it implies when the mind knows its own form of light by investigation, in other words, by turning our attention within and facing only our form of light. What does he mean by our form of light? Our form of light is here a metaphor for awareness. So when we face our own awareness, that is the fundamental awareness that illumines the mind. In other words, the awareness of our own existence, I am, when we face that, and the mind will thereby be dissolved in that, and that alone is ume-unichi, real awareness. And that real awareness alone is real happiness. So it all ties up. What Bhagavan teaches in different works and in different parts of the same work, they're all tying together. So what Bhagavan says is, it's not sufficient just to give up, to withdraw our attention from other things, because that will only be a temporary state of dissolution. We want to bring about the permanent dissolution, in other words, to sleep eternally, in this blissful sleep of jnana. We need to turn our attention within and investigate ourselves. That is the implication. So this paragraph is very, very important, not only for what Bhagavan explicitly says in this paragraph. What he's talking about explicitly is about happiness and misery, how we experience happiness. But what he implies hereby is equally important. The implication is that if we want to attain infinite happiness, that is our own real nature, we need to investigate ourselves. As he said in the first paragraph, that is the only way to experience the infinite happiness that we actually are. Om Namo Bhagavate Sri Arunachala Ramanaya.